Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another session of the webinar. I will be starting the webinar in a few minutes. Thank you for joining us. So we shall begin now. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome from Krista team. Krista is the mother and child healthcare brand of Redcliffe Life Sciences. It is a complete online reproductive health platform providing all services for fertility and pregnancy. I, Shinka Arora, will be the moderator for today's webinar. And today we have with us Dr. Bhavna Anand, who will be speaking on the topic of role of ultrasound scan and fetal medicine during pregnancy. Dr. Bhavna is a distinguished fetal medicine specialist trained at SGPGIMS, Lucknow, India. She has more than 15 years of experience in the field of obstetric sonography and various fetal interventional procedures. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. She
Thank you,
is an
Krista.
expert in handling high-risk cases. She is also an outstanding academic career with several publications in various national and international journals, including Fetal Diagnosis and Therapy, Journal of Maternal, Fetal and Neonatal Medicine, and International Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology in India. Over to you, ma'am. You may start the presentation.
Thank you, Krista, for giving me the opportunity. A very good evening to all the participants and all the patients in the group. Now I'll be starting the presentation. Today's talk will be over role of ultrasound scan and fetal medicine during pregnancy. I'm Dr. Bhavna. I'm working as a consultant in fetal medicine at Manipal Hospital, New Delhi. So managing a pregnancy is a teamwork. It involves working of obstetrician, fetal medicine, and neonatologist. And routine ultrasound examination is now an established part of antenatal care. Ongoing technological advancement have allowed the resolution of ultrasound imaging to evolve to a level at which early fetal development can be assessed and monitored in detail. So, what are the types of ultrasound we need in pregnancy? We need an early pregnancy scan, which may be done up to 10 weeks. Then, an 11 to 14 week scan is done, which is an important scan. A 20-week scan, which is also called a second trimester scan, level 2 scan, anatomy scan, is done. Then, further growth scans are needed as per the need. They are done in the third trimester or in the last 3 months of pregnancy. Further, special and some additional ultrasounds are also done in pregnancy, like Doppler examination, cervical length measurement, fetal heart examination, and 3D scan sometimes. So, a question arises in everybody's mind that is prenatal ultrasound safe? Many international professional bodies, including International Society of Ultrasound in Obs and Gynae, have reached a consensus that the use of B mode and M mode prenatal ultrasound, due to its limited acoustic output, appears to be safe for all stages of pregnancy. However, fetal exposure time should be minimized using shortest scan time and lowest possible power output. So we will be dealing all the ultrasounds one by one. First trimester ultrasound. The purpose of doing an ultrasound in first trimester is to provide accurate information to optimize the antenatal care, then to further confirm the viability, establish gestational age accurately, determine the number of fetuses, and in the presence of multiple pregnancy, we have to assess chronicity and amnioticity. Then towards the end of first trimester, we get an opportunity to detect gross abnormalities and also offer first trimester aneuploidy screening. However, many gross malformations may develop later in pregnancy or may not be detected even with appropriate equipment and in most experienced hand. So, when it should be done, the first trimester ultrasound, ISOP says that there is no reason to offer a routine ultrasound simply to confirm an ongoing early pregnancy in the absence of any clinical concern, pathological symptoms, or specific indication. And they say that it is advisable to offer first trimester ultrasound when gestational age is between 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks. But in India, routinely in clinical practice, we advise a ultrasound at first visit, and this gives an opportunity to detect many abnormalities at the earliest. So we'll now go through ultrasound appearance of a normal intrauterine pregnancy. First of all, a gestational sac appears, which has a regular shape. It is present inside the uterus in the endometrial cavity, present eccentrically at the fundus. Its position is at the fundus and the walls are regular. There is presence of a double decidual sign. Then inside the gestational sac, there is presence of a yolk sac, a embryo with the heartbeat, and in the ovaries, we may find a corpus luteal cyst. So the threshold level, which identify at the earliest a gestational sac, is 4 week 3 days, which correspond to a beta HCG level of 500 units. And the discriminatory level identify when we should always see a sac is 5 week 2 days, which correspond to a beta HCG level of 1800. So, to see the chronology of the landmarks, at 5 week we expect an empty gestational sac with a diameter of around 10 mm, and at 5.5 week we expect a gestational sac with a yolk sac. Then an embryo appears, which is typically around 1 to 2 mm when first detected, and then it gradually increases in size by approximately 1 mm per day. Then a heartbeat appear, and it is evident usually when the embryo measures 2 mm or more. But if but it is not evident in around 5 to 10% of viable embryos measuring between 2 to 4 mm. So it is always advisable to wait for cardiac activity to appear and not to take hasty decisions. When we have seen a normal growth of a gestational sac and early pregnancy, then we can determine what is abnormal. So, first abnormality may be abnormality in the growth. A blighted ovum is called when the mean sac diameter reaches up to 20 mm, but there is no evidence of any embryo or yolk sac inside. It is called a missed abortion if the embryo reaches up to the size of 10 mm, but without any evidence of heartbeat. When the mean sac diameter is 15 mm or CRL is less than 10 mm, then please wait for 2 weeks and repeat the test after 2 weeks. It may happen that the heartbeat or the fetal pole may not be seen in the earlier ultrasound and then may be seen. So to not to waste a precious pregnancy. If gestational sac is smaller than expected for gestational age, possibility of incorrect dates should always be considered. Secondly, we can diagnose an ectopic pregnancy on an early ultrasound. If there is no intrauterine pregnancy and there is presence of free fluid or blood in the pelvis or in the abdomen, along with an adnexal mass with or without any identifiable gestational sac inside, then a possibility of ectopic pregnancy is there. We should always correlate it with clinically and with beta HCG levels. Possibility of a heterotopic pregnancy may be there if there are risk factors like pregnancy conceived after ovulation induction or an IVF pregnancy. It is presence of a normal intrauterine pregnancy along with an adnexal mass. which is also a pregnancy, and high degree of suspicion should be there if there is any free fluid or or these kind of risk factors associated. Then there may be spontaneous abortion. The gestational sac, which we described earlier, is not in the proper position or in the proper shape. It is distorted, thin walled, empty, and there is no yolk sac or embryo inside. Then a possibility that the pregnancy may be wasted spontaneously. But we should always give early gestation a benefit of doubt. We should wait for a few weeks and decide the final diagnosis. There may be variable appearance of blood or debris, and a cervical loss may be open in these conditions. Then we may get a subchorionic hemorrhage. It is the hemorrhage between chorion and decidua. It may have a normal outcome. It may lead to threatened abortion or spontaneous abortion. So there is importance of size. We say that if it is occupying more than 50% of the gestational sex circumference, then it may be detrimental to the baby. Then also factors like maternal age and age of gestation, presence of heartbeat, they also affect the fate of subchorionic hemorrhage. We may detect multiple pregnancies at the time of an early pregnancy, and then later on decide whether they are dichorionic or monochorionic, because monochorionic pregnancies need great follow-up. Then we can diagnose the malformation at early gestation if we are doing an early pregnancy scan. Like in this picture, we are seeing that it's a 8-week fetus with acrania. Other malformations may be diagnosed at an early pregnancy scan, like ovarian cyst, placental defects, fibroid, or a cervical incompetence or shortening. Then we come to an important scan, that is 11 to 13 plus week scan. If we have missed an early pregnancy scan, then we can date the pregnancy by using CRL, that is crown rump length of the baby, or by doing the head measurements by doing BPD or head circumference. CRL should be measured till the baby length is around up to 84 mm, and after this, HC should be, head circumference should be used to determine the gestational age. Also at 11 to 13 week, we should do a proper anatomical assessment. There is a checklist by ICOG which says that a head to toe examination of baby is needed, and in which we should do uh, head, neck, face, spine, chest, heart, abdomen, abdominal wall, extremities, placenta, and cord. They all should be examined and should be noted present and normal. So we will go through a pictorial representation of anatomical assessment. This is a picture showing length, doing length of the baby. Then the size of head should be measured. Presence of two lateral ventricles along with the choroid plexus should be seen. Presence of nasal bone. The spine should be seen till the end. Then a presence of a four-chambered heart. Presence of orbits with lens and nose with chin should be seen. Presence of a stomach along with the spine and umbilical vein, then two kidney along with the diaphragm may be seen. Presence of both hand and feet, upper limbs should be seen, and presence of umbilical cord insertion should be seen. Then 11 to 13 weeks scan give us an opportunity to do chromosomal anomaly assessment. It is done by measuring the nuchal translucency, which is the fluid in the behind the neck, and it should be measured between 11 to 13 weeks CRL. Additional aneuploidy markers like nasal bone, tricuspid regurgitation, and ductus venosus flow may be also seen, and screening performance of diagnosing a chromosomal anomaly can be further improved by addition of other markers like measurement of free beta HCG and PAPE. Then the 11 to 13 weeks can also give us an opportunity to predict the risk of preeclampsia or hypertensive disorders in pregnancy by doing a uterine artery Doppler. Then coming to next important scan, which is a mid-trimester ultrasound or a level 2 ultrasound or an anomaly scan. What is the purpose of doing a trimester scan is to provide an accurate diagnostic information to determine the gestational age if it was not done previously, and to perform fetal measurements for the timely detection of growth abnormalities later in pregnancy. Also to detect congenital malformation and multiple pregnancies. When it should be done, a routine mid trimester ultrasound scan is often performed between 18 to 22 weeks of pregnancy. And why it is done at this gestation? Because this period represent a compromise between dating the pregnancy and timely detection of major congenital anomalies. And if any of the anomaly is detected, then a timely decision of termination or not to terminate can be taken within time. So, what are the guidelines for examination in a level 2 scan? We should rule out multiple gestation, fetal movements should be seen, morphology of placenta or any abnormalities should be detected, fetal biometry is taken, and an estimated fetal weight is calculated, a detailed anatomical survey is done, Doppler ultrasound is also needed, and examination of cervix, uterine morphology, and adnexa is done. So again, a checklist of the anatomical survey is given by ISOC, which we follow, and for the anatomical assessment of baby. Going through a pictorial representation in level 2 ultrasound, we see for presence of a normal cavum septum pellucidai, then tooth helimi in the posterior fossa cerebellum along with cisterna magna and nuchal fold, then presence of an intact upper lip, chin, lower lip, two nostrils, presence of a nasal bone in a medial profile view, and presence of absence of any deviated chin or two orbits and with lenses. Then in the heart examination, we see for four-chamber heart along with the outflow tract, presence of a normal cord insertion, bladder examination, two kidney and spine is seen till the end. Biometry is taken, presence of both the upper limb and lower limbs along with the feet and hand is taken. Then the relationship of cervix and placenta is noted along with the Likert assessment. So next scan is growth scan. Growth scanners are not always needed. They are needed if there is any risk factor or related findings which are known to be associated with abnormal growth. So if we are doing if we are finding an abnormal growth, then interval growth should be best assessed with serial scan done at least 3 weeks apart. And a 36-week scan is more effective than 32-week scan in detecting growth retardation and prediction of adverse perinatal and neonatal outcome. What should be measured in a growth scan? We measure all the fetal biometry and estimate a fetal weight, and then put it on a centile or a Z-score charting, and then ascertain whether the growth is fine or it is in growth restricted region. So fetal growth, an adequate for gestational age fetus or AGA fetus is one whose size is within normal range for this gestational age, and it is between 10th and 90th percentile. So if it is not a AGA fetus, it may have growth abnormalities. Growth abnormalities include, it may be a SGA fetus or a small for gestational age fetus, whose SGA is whose size is below a predefined threshold, like we discussed, like fetal weight or abdominal circumference below the 10th percentile. It may be a LGA or large for gestational age fetus whose size is above the predefined threshold, like weight or AC above the 90th centile. Or it may be a fetal growth restricted baby or IUGR, the fetus which has not achieved its growth potential. So IUGR babies are not always SGA babies. SGA and LGA babies are in the lower or higher range of their growth, but they are following the growth pattern. But FGR baby is not achieving its growth potential, so it is dangerous and it may lead to complications. So our main aim is to find out FGR babies. FGR can be classified into early onset or a late onset FGR, which is detected before 32 weeks, which can lead to more complications, and a late onset, which is detected after 32 weeks. The terms symmetrical or asymmetrical FGR are no longer used because they do not provide any additional information regarding the etiology or prognosis. So there are clear-cut guidelines to diagnose a case with early or late FGR, and we should follow them to diagnose a baby with FGR. And every SGA baby should not be diagnosed as a growth-restricted baby. If we find an abnormal biometry or we find that the baby is growth restricted, then a detailed fetal assessment is needed. We should again confirm the accurate dating. Maternal factors which may leading to this abnormal biometry should be found out, like hypertension, diabetes, or infectious exposure. A fetal karyotype may be sought, and evaluation of uteroplacental insufficiency by doing a color Doppler study should be done. Then placental morphology assessment, that is cord insertion, sites, and appearance should be done. Then the management of will depend on the cause of FGR if we have found out one. So we have completed the first part of our presentation, that is role of ultrasound in managing pregnancy. I think you must have convinced that ultrasound plays a great role in management of a pregnancy and leading to a normal mother and a healthy baby. So now the next part of our presentation is role of fetal medicine in pregnancy. What is fetal medicine? It's a subspecialty of obstetrics. It focuses on managing health concern of the mother and fetus prior to, during, and shortly after pregnancy. It manages high risk pregnancy and pregnancy related complications, and also manages condition leading to fetus at risk. So, management of a high risk pregnancy include prediction, prevention, and management of preterm labor, preeclampsia, management of a twin or triplet pregnancy, managing a diabetes, Rh isoimmunized, heart or kidney disease patient, hypertension, thrombophilia. Management of high risk fetus include detection of chromosomal disorders, both screening and prenatal diagnosis, detection of congenital abnormalities, infection, genetic diseases, growth restriction. So we'll try to understand the role of fetal medicine by taking some case-based scenario. So our first case is a patient X who's 34 years female. Along with her husband, she came to the OPD for routine checkup. Her ultrasound was suggestive of dichorionic diamniotic twin at 8 weeks 3 days each. On investigation, she was found to be beta thalassemia minor trait on HPLC. Her husband HPLC was also ordered, which also suggested beta thalassemia minor trait. So we told her that there is a risk. What is the risk? The risk of carrying a baby with beta thalassemia major. What is beta thalassemia major? It's beta thalassemia occurs when there is mutation in the gene that code for beta globulin chain, resulting in reduced or absent production of beta chain present in hemoglobin. So we'll understand further the pathogenesis of beta thalassemia by this diagram. In a normal hemoglobin, apart from a heme particle, there are certain globin genes. These globin genes have two alpha and two beta chains. It's two alpha and two beta chains in a normal hemoglobin A, and these normal RBCs are are discoid in shape and they are round in shape. But if there is reduction in the beta globulin synthesis, the one of the beta chains is reduced, then there is excess of alpha globulin chains, and these insoluble alpha globins are aggregated in the RBC, and there is abnormal RBC formation, abnormal blood cell formation. These blood cells are formed in the bone marrow of long bones, and if they are not formed, then it leads to ineffective erythropoiesis. That is, the most RBCs die within the bone marrow. This leads to anemia. So, this leads to anemia, and because of tissue hypoxia, there are certain skeletal deformities like frontal bossing, teeth abnormalities, gum abnormalities. And when few of these RBCs, which many of these RBCs die within the bone marrow, few cells leave the circulation and they reaches the circulation, and these the abnormal RBCs with alpha globulin, alpha genes aggregated, they are uh, they are further destructed in the spleen, and this leads to extravascular hemolysis, which further leads to anemia. Then, because of ineffective erythropoiesis, the body tries to gain more iron so that more RBC formation can occur, and this leads to increased iron absorption, which is but iron is not deficient, so it is further deposited in heart and liver, leading to hematochromesis and leading to iron overload. This further, because of anemia, we give blood transfusion, and which further enhances the iron deposition in the organs. So you can see, you can think that the beta thalassemia major is a deadly condition. This condition is inherited in an autosomal recessive pattern, and it is most common in races of Mediterranean, African, and South Asian descent. India includes the one. So the inheritance we can understand by this diagram, that uh, if a male and female, the parents both have one gene defective, the gene green is the defective gene, then during the conception there are four possible combinations. Either both the normal genes are inherited, leading to a normal two normal genes and leading to a normal individual, or both abnormal genes are inherited, which leads to severe thalassemia, or further there is 50% chance that one abnormal and one normal gene come. So in 75% of cases, or 3 out of 4, there is a chance that a baby is born with either the normal genes or with only one defective genes, which are like the parents, and the baby will be doing normal. But in one of the four combination, or 25% chance is that offspring is developing severe thalassemia or beta thalassemia major. So this 1 in 4 chance is quite great, and we need a prenatal detection for this. So earliest prenatal diagnosis can be done by doing an 11 to 13 weeks CVS testing. CVS is chorionic villus sampling or placental biopsy. Other options, if this is missed or cannot be done, then we can do an amniocentesis or cord blood sample. So early diagnosis gives time to the parent to take the decisions. Some parents may consider termination as the quality of life may not be good. They need regular blood transfusions. Also, PGD is another option. So in our case, we counsel the patient about the 25% risk of carrying a baby with thalassemia major in each fetus, and a plan discussed with them, that is, we'll do a normal 11 to 13 week scan at 11 to 12 weeks, then doing a CVS testing for each fetus as 11 to 12 weeks, and need for fetal reduction or abortion as per the situation, as it was a twin pregnancy. Risk of miscarriage with both the procedures, CVS and fetal reduction, was discussed with them. So it was a high risk pregnancy because both the we have to diagnose thalassemia in two twins. So we did. Luckily, there were two placenta, and we did the chorionic villus biopsy from the two placenta, and the sample was sent to the lab. And first baby came out to be thalassemia major. This is the lab report, and second baby came out to be normal. The patient was quite happy, but there was a risk with proper mapping of the uterus. We did take the decision of fetal reduction of one of the fetus with extensive counseling of the parents, reduction done, and repeat checking done next day. Rest of the pregnancy was monitored as high risk pregnancy. So the mother with thalassemia minor, as we have understood previously, that she is usually a normal pregnancy, except her hemoglobin has to be monitored and kept around 10 by dietary supplements and oral folic acid. Iron supplementation is rarely required, only if serum iron is low. So we did a fetal reduction. Most common route of fetal reduction is transabdominal. It's an OPD procedure done under local anesthesia. A 22 gauge needle is inserted in the thorax, preferably in the fetal heart, under ultrasound guidance, followed by insertion of 1 to 2 ml of potassium chloride uh, to cause fetal asystole, and which is confirmed after 30 minutes. Preference of doing a fetal reduction is between 11 to 14 weeks because it's a safest period. It allows better prognosis for the remaining fetus, and it is always possible to identify major malformation in the remaining fetus. The dead fetus may be spontaneously expelled or may remain within the mother where it was expelled with the other fetus. So in our case, further ANC was uneventful. We did a rescan at 16 weeks, which was normal with normal cervix. She delivered vaginally. Her labor was uneventful. Her placenta examined and fetus preparations was also delivered. So to conclude in this case, we understood that if both partners are having beta thalassemia trait, counseling regarding inheritance of beta thalassemia major in the developing fetus is necessary. Then we come to case number two. Case number two patient was a 28-year female. She was second gravida, previous normal delivery, came for first antenatal visit for routine checkup. Her blood group was found to be O negative. Husband blood group was B positive. She has not received any anti-D in her previous pregnancy. And beside routine investigations, an indirect comb test was ordered, which was positive. So we told her that there is a risk. What is the risk? Risk of RH isoimmunization and erythroblastosis fetalis. So she asked, what is RH isoimmunization? So we explained her with the figure that if a mother with RH negative blood conceives, has a RH positive husband, then there are chances that there are 50% chance that their baby has a RH positive blood group. So if a woman with RH negative blood group conceive with a RH positive baby, then during delivery or any fetomaternal event leading to hemorrhage, these RH positive blood may escape and come to the maternal circulation. When the Rh positive blood come in the Rh negative environment, then the blood is sensitized, and the mother forms an antibodies to fight against these foreign Rh positive blood cells. So these antibodies remain in the circulation after this pregnancy is over. If the patient conceive in the next pregnancy, again with the Rh positive baby, then these antibodies come into the circulation of Rh positive baby and leads to destruction of its red blood cells, leading to fetal anemia and may even death. So erythroblastosis, in which red blood cells of fetus and newborn are hemolyzed by maternal alloantibodies, leading to various manifestations like pleural effusion, pericardial placentomegaly, leading to a pale edematous baby with jaundice and further death. So uh, again, doing this with a flow chart, when Rh positive fetal cells enter Rh negative maternal circulation because of delivery, abortion, or inadequate dosage of anti-D, large fetomaternal hemorrhage, leads to formation of anti-D antibodies in the maternal circulation. This leads to formation attachment of anti-D antibodies to Rh positive fetal cells, resulting in destruction and leading to various manifestations like anemia, hydrops, kernicterus, hepatosplenomegaly, and subsequent death of the baby. So it is a dreadful condition. 97% of all cases of erythroblastosis fetalis are due to antibodies against Rhd antigen, which we have seen in the previous slide. The remaining cases are due to antibodies against other antigens which are rare, like Kel, C, E, and E, etc. It may also be caused by transfusion of Rh positive blood to a Rh negative woman. So, an Rhd alloimmunization can occur only in presence of three conditions. The fetus must have Rh positive RBCs, and the mother must have Rh negative RBCs. The mother must have the immunogenic capacity to antigen, and a sufficient number of fetal RBCs must gain access to the maternal circulation. So Rh isoimmunization all doesn't occur always. It may happen. So how to prevent this erythroblastosis condition? We may prevent it at two steps. First, we should prevent the formation of any antibodies formation, that is prevention of Rh aluminization. Antibodies should not be formed within the mother. And if they are formed, then how to manage this isoimmunized pregnancy. So, taking the first step, prevention of Rh alloimmunization. Every pregnancy, at first prenatal visit, an ABO and Rh blood group should be ascertained. If the mother is found to be Rh negative and husband is Rh positive, or woman is Rh positive but with history of blood transfusion, unexplained fetal losses, or infants with unexplained jaundice, Rh antibodies should be tested. Then, what is the test name? It is indirect Coombs test. So, if it is a Rh negative mother, always do a husband blood group. If it is negative, no further testing is needed. If it is positive, then we should do an antibody screening at 20, 24, and 28 weeks. If the antibody screen is negative at every time, we should give an anti-D prophylaxis at 28 weeks. If it has becomes positive, then we should manage it as an Rh sensitized pregnancy. If ICT is negative, she should receive anti-D at 28 weeks. If it is positive, then we should always do a concentration of antibodies by titration method, and a critical level should be known. So the antepartum administration of anti-D at 28 weeks, it decreases the incidence of third trimester immunization from 1.8 to 0.1%. So it is quite necessary to give an anti-D at time. After receiving anti-D, the antibody screening will detect some anti-D antibodies in the patient's serum, which should not be more than 1:4. So there is no need of repeating antibody titers after receiving anti-D prophylaxis at 28 weeks. If there is bleeding any time in pregnancy for some procedure, or some procedure is done, if it is done or there is bleeding at less than 12 week of pregnancy, 50 microgram of anti-D should be given to the patient, and if it is more than 12 weeks, then a full dose, that is 300 microgram, should be given. If there is suspicion of heavy bleeding, an assessment of volume of fetal whole blood should be performed by Kb count, and appropriate amount of Rhd immunoglobulin should be given. If antepartum anti-D is not received, then it should be given immediately postpartum or within 72 days. It can be given till 14 to 28 days. So we could not do this if the patient didn't receive antibodies. The pregnancy become isoimmunized. So we have to manage that isoimmunized pregnancy. If ICT become positive anytime during pregnancy, then we should follow her with MCA PSV. MCA is middle cerebral artery peak systolic volume velocity. It's a sensitive and specific marker for fetal anemia, and it replaces the need for amniocentesis. The peak systolic velocity in the middle cerebral artery is taken, and it is plotted in a pre-filled form. If the velocity, it is according to the gestational age and the MCA PSV. So we will plot it in a chart, and if it is coming in the A zone, then this denotes that the fetus may have a severe anemia. If it is in the B zone, then it is indicative of mild anemia. If it is in the C zone, then the pregnancy is safe. The baby is having a normal hematocrit. The sensitivity is quite good for this chart. So if the ICD titers are above 1:8 titers, we are fetal testing for prediction of anemia by MCA PSV is indicated from 18 weeks onwards. If the MCA PSV remains at less than 1.5 MOM for gestational age, that means it is in the C chart, then a follow-up 1 to 2 weekly, and we should deliver the baby at 37 weeks. If at any time MCA PSV become more than 1.5 MOM, then a cordocentesis is needed to detect fetal hematocrit. And if fetal hematocrit comes out to be less than 30%, then an intrauterine transfusion is indicated. Intrauterine transfusion means giving blood to the baby so that it may deliver safely. So in our case, the ICT was positive. Its titer was 1:16. That means our patient was Rh isoimmunized. We followed her carefully with serial ultrasounds to detect any features of fetal anemia, fluid collection, high drops. Our MCA-PSV was less than 1.0 MOM till 34 weeks. At 34 weeks, MCA-PSV comes at 1.5 MOM, and decision of delivery versus cordocentesis was taken. She was given betamethasone cover and a cesarean section was done in view of breech presentation. Patient had a healthy newborn with birth weight of 2.4 kg, hemoglobin 13, and cord blood bilirubin was normal. Her direct comb test was positive. There was no need of exchange transfusion, and baby has mild jaundice. So baby has a normal outcome. So to conclude with this case, that RH isoimmunization is a preventable condition. We should try to prevent RH formation of antibodies by giving anti-D at time. And if it is formed, then we should manage the condition with a close follow-up. We'll be taking a third case. Our third case is a primea gravida, came at 14 week of pregnancy with no previous antenatal checkup. On routine testing, her Ebola IgM and IgG was positive. Ultrasound examination we did revealed a single live fetus of 14 weeks with a heart defect. So we told her that there is a risk. What is the risk? There was a risk of rubella infection. Risk of rubella infection is always there if a woman of childbearing age who is rubella non-immune. What is rubella virus? Rubella virus is an RNA enveloped virus which causes mild diseases typically in childhood. And if the mother didn't get a childhood disease, then it may happen uh, in the adult group. And it is characterized by onset of maculopapular rash, lymphadenopathy, fever, and arthropathy. But if this infection occurs in pregnancy, it may lead to devastating complication in the fetus, which is called fetus congenital rubella syndrome. Congenital rubella syndrome occurs during embryogenesis. There is classic triad of cataract, cardiac abnormalities, and sensorineural deafness. Rubella infection in the fetus may lead to many complications. Like it may lead to transient effects like low birth weight, purpura, anemia, hepatosplenomegaly, or may lead to permanent deformities like eye deformity, ear deformity, cardiac defects, central nervous system defects, and craniofacial malformation, or late onset defects like endocrine, cardiovascular, and neurological abnormalities. So it can affect from head to toe. This is a baby with the mulberry rashes, and this is the presence of cataract in the baby because of rubella. So, if the maternal infection occurs, then the risk of congenital infection and defect depend on the gestational age at infection. It is not same throughout the pregnancy, so we should understand that at what gestation it affects what. If conception occurs after the rash, then the risk of infection is quite low. But if the rash appears 3 to 6 weeks after the LMP, that means the pregnancy has started and then the rubella rash appears, and the risk of infection is high. Risk of infection before 11 weeks, that is in the first trimester, it is highest. That is 90%. And also the risk of congenital defects is highest in first trimester. Later on, after this first trimester, the risk of congenital infection is although quite high, but the risk of congenital defect decreases, and so as that it is 0% after 18 weeks. So there is no risk of congenital defect from rubella infection if it is occurring after 18 weeks. So if we get a patient with rubella IgG positive, which is a routine testing, so if the rubella IgG is positive, then the patient is immune. There is no risk to the patient, and patient has got proper antibodies. This is a good sign. If rubella IgG test is negative, then the patient is susceptible to get infection during pregnancy. So we should repeat the test after 3 weeks. So there can be 4 possible combination. We should repeat the test along with the rubella IgM testing. If the rubella IgM testing comes negative, along with IgG also is negative, then there is no infection. Patient is safe. She might get the infection later on, so she should receive the vaccine after the pregnancy. If IgM is negative but IgG is continuously rising, then it's a case with non-specific stimulation of immune system, and a avidity testing should be done. If IgM also positive, IgG is positive, then it is a possible infection. Avidity testing should be done. If IgM comes positive but IgG remains negative, then it is a probable infection. We should repeat the IgG within 5 to 10 days. And if it comes positive, then it comes into to the possible infection group. So if rubella IgM and IgG are positive, then a avidity test has a role. What is a avidity test? Rubella, IgG rubella specific avidity, it is useful in dating the primary rubella infection, that it tells that when the infection has happened. If it is a low avidity index, that means very small, weak antibodies are formed, then it denotes sorry, it's a low avidity index, then it denotes that there is a recent primary infection. And if it is high IgG avidity test, it exclude a recent primary infection. High avidity means that a good and strong antibodies are formed against the rubella. That means that the infection was quite old. It was more than 3 months of 3 months, and it exclude a recent primary infection. That means the patient and baby are safe. And if it comes out to be a low avidity index, then it denotes that a recent primary infection has occurred and pregnancy is at risk. Also, IgG avidity should be interpreted with caution in cases when IgG titer is excessively low. So, how to manage a rubella infection case? It depends on gestational age at which the infection was arised. So, if infection was arised before 18 weeks, the fetus is at high risk of infection and severe symptoms, and termination of pregnancy should be discussed and accepted. If the infection occurs after 18 weeks, as we have discussed previously, the pregnancy should be continued with simple ultrasound monitoring. An examination of newborn and testing for RV IgM should be done in the newborn. If the pregnancy is at 12, if we find out that the infection occurs between 12 to 18 weeks, then a prenatal diagnosis is necessary. A detailed ultrasound and amniotic fluid viral RNA detection should be done by PCR method, and it should be done particularly for infections occurring between 12 to 18 weeks. So specificity of a prenatal diagnosis is approximately 100% and sensitivity is greater than 90% if at least 6 week period has been passed between infection and sampling. Sample collection is performed after 21 weeks and sample for RT-PCR is stored and transported frozen. So a vaccine is also available. RA27/3 is the vaccine name, and it is available and most commonly used. All women of childbearing age should avoid pregnancy for 28 days following vaccination. So in our case, because IgM and IgG rubella was positive, we did an rubella avidity testing, which suggestive of low avidity, means recent infection. Patient and her husband were counseled extensively. In view of high risk of infection and congenital affection, decision of termination of pregnancy was taken. The next pregnancy was planned after a period of 4 months. She delivered a full-term healthy newborn. So to conclude in this case, rubella IgG test should be done in unvaccinated women at the first visit, and risk of congenital defect is high if rubella infection occurs in first trimester. So the key point of this presentation is there are advantages of advancing technology. Better resolution means diagnosis of both major and minor fetal anomalies at early gestation and with more accuracy. It also helps in better couple counseling and treatment of fetal conditions by therapy. So we at Manipal Hospital provides facilities for genetic counseling. We have a high-end ultrasound system with 4D technology. We do a list of pregnancy scans, NIPT, non-invasive and invasive prenatal testing. Both are available in the hospital along with fetal therapy. So thank you for patient listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking our time. It was a wonderful presentation, and we have a lot of questions that have come up during the presentation. Ma'am, you can stop the presentation and we can take the questions then. Yeah. So, ma'am, the first question is by Miss Naram. How accurate is the gestational age using a USG scan?
It is quite accurate if we are doing it in early pregnancy, but as the gestational age advances, then the dating of pregnancy becomes quite uh, low with ultrasound scan. But definitely, with the in comparison with the dates, it is quite effective, quite accurate.
Then we have another question. This is by a patient that the last scan at 22 weeks has shown signs of CDH in the baby. What should be done?
So the CDH pregnancy needs a close follow-up. It depends on the severity of CDH. So I think she should consult. Uh, she can send me the images and the details. Then we can further discuss the pregnancy management because it depends on the severity of diaphragmatic hernia details.
Okay,
That,
sure, ma'am. We'll send her all the details for an appointment. We
yeah.
have another question. A lady is aged 27 years and has had an IUD at 8 months of gestational age. This was her first pregnancy and all her USG and antenatal tests were normal. She wants to know what can she do to prevent this in the next pregnancy. She has never not had bleeding or cramping.
Yeah, this also needs a detailed evaluation of that lady. Uh, any exclusion of any maternal high risk factors which may not have been found in the previous ultrasound or on the blood test. So she needs a battery of testing, maternal blood testing, and genetic evaluation if needed.
Okay,
So
ma'am. We have another question by Dr. Supriya. She wants to know the difference between early and late FGR in a little more detail.
so early it requires it's an implication on the etiology and for the management purpose that we need to diagnose it an early or late FGR. Late FGR usually has a good prognosis, and early FGR usually has a worse prognosis. So there are set criteria defined by ISOP to diagnose the condition, and we manage the condition like that only. If
Okay, ma'am. And we have another question. Can preeclampsia at 7 months of gestation cause intrauterine growth retardation and what can be done for this pregnancy?
So management of hypertension is quite necessary. We have to manage this condition as a very high risk. It may lead to intrauterine growth retardation and Doppler abnormalities. So the blood pressure should be controlled. She should be given rest, and the dietary implications have a certain less role, but antihypertensives and uh, fetal monitoring should be done for that case.
Okay, ma'am. And Miss Kritika wants to know that will USG scan help to detect intellectual problems as well?
Sometimes, sometimes like the Down syndrome screening, which we are doing routinely, it has an
Yes.
intellectual problem. Also, the cases of autism, although we are not able to diagnose it fully on ultrasound, but there are certain parameters.
Ma'am, like you are mentioning that there are certain soft markers that can be seen for these particular
Yeah,
aneuploidies and trisomies. Okay.
yeah,
Then another question is, can a meningomyocele be corrected with surgery post delivery of a baby?
exactly. It can be corrected.
Okay. And it can be detected
It
before.
can be detected before. It has
Yes,
to be
ma'am.
followed up. Intrauterine surgery is not available in India right now. and it can be the surgery by pediatric surgery later on.
All right. Ma'am, another question is, can NT scan be done later than 12 weeks of gestation?
It can be done from 11 to 13 plus 6 week of gestation. So 12 week is an appropriate time, but can be done till 13 plus 6.
But the accuracy might vary then, or
No, no,
are there the
no,
parameters are
no,
different?
no. It can be done between 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks with same accuracy.
Okay, ma'am. We have another question. What can be done for a pregnancy where an anomaly scan shows congenital heart defect?
So what can be done?
Yes, like we know that in the scan we can see that the child is having a
Congenital heart
congenital
defect.
heart defect.
Congenital heart defects may be lethal or may not be lethal. So it depends on the anomaly found. So if it is a lethal and it is diagnosed before 20 weeks, a termination of pregnancy may be offered. But if it is not a lethal anomaly, then a surgery is available and they with a good result.
Okay, ma'am. And ma'am, there is another question. Can brain defects like cerebellar hypoplasia be detected through a USG scan?
Exactly, it can be detected.
Okay, ma'am. And we have another question by Mr. Kohli. Hi, ma'am. I want to ask you regarding the abortion. My wife has had continuous 3 abortions in 2 years. We have done tests like TORCH and HSG.
Mhm.
So, why is it happening? I think this is what they want to know.
Yeah, this need a battery of testing, including genetic testing. So they
Genetic
may,
test.
yeah. So they may consult. They may send a detailed report to on my email, and then I can further discuss with them.
Sure, ma'am. Sure, we'll send them the details. We have another question. A direct Coombs test is positive. What is the significance?
Direct Coombs test comes in the baby. Mother mother has indirect Coombs test positive. So if it is direct Coombs test, that means the baby is already having hemolysis. The RBCs, the blood cells are already getting destructed. So it
Okay.
needs blood transfusion or antiglobulin in them.
Okay, ma'am. I think we have only two, three more questions. Yeah, by Miss Neha. Can polycystic kidney disease be detected through a USG scan? And can such a fetus develop normally till term and live a healthy life?
If it is an autosomal recessive polycystic kidney, then it usually has a grave prognosis. Baby can't live a normal healthy life. But it is if it is an autosomal dominant type, then the patient then they go in.
Okay, ma'am. And yeah, one more question that we have is there any risk of congenital anomalies in a fetus whose mother has tested positive for rubella IgG?
No, rubella IgG means the patient is immune. It has good antibodies in her body, so she is not susceptible to rubella infection.
Okay, ma'am. And then we have, um, yeah. So actually, the patients are thanking you for the reply. So
Thank you so much for
yeah, I think these were all the questions. It was a wonderful session, ma'am, and I think a lot of people have gotten their answers, and everybody is welcome to connect with us offline also. I have sent our details in the chat box itself.
sure.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you, Krista, for giving me the opportunity, and thank you all the listeners for a patient listening and asking questions. If any query remains, then you can personally email me or through the Krista, and we will be
Yes, ma'am.
definitely answering
I
you.
have put in the Krista email ID,
Yeah,
and
sure.
you can, if any queries have remained unanswered, shall be taken up later, and you can also book your appointments with us.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you so much, ma'am. We'll end the webinar here, and everybody please stay tuned for the upcoming ones. Thank you.
Thank you.